What's up, guys? Welcome to Daily Dose of Reddit. This is your Daily Doser, Zach, and today's Daily Dose of Reddit subreddit is r/ProRevenge. There we go.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode.
This story's called, I Had an Office Food Thief, so I Bought a Nanny Cam. A couple things about me that made it really suck to have a food thief. I have a lot of food allergies, so I can't just get lunch at the cafeteria or at a nearby restaurant. I have a new baby who I'm breastfeeding and who I pump for when I'm at work. You know how hungry pregnant people are? Yeah, the caloric requirement for breastfeeding is 100 to 200 calories higher. I am always hungry. Because I have a new baby, half the time I don't manage to show up at work with a lunch. I either run out of time to pack one, or if I did remember, I leave it on the counter. My solution to all of this was to leave lots of non-perishable snacks in my office, and also a lot of candy because I also have a 3-year-old and therefore work is the only place I can shovel Skittles into my mouth without a little hand extending into my field of vision and a little voice saying, "Please." Snacks that were specifically free of my allergens, some of which were specialty foods because of this. The type of specialty food that just doesn't taste as good as food that contains the allergen, and also costs twice as much. Because I'm not getting a lot of sleep right now, I deserve nice things. So because I'm not getting a lot of sleep right now, when I first came back from maternity leave, assembled my snack board, and started having things go missing, I genuinely thought I was just losing my mind. Boxes of candy were running out faster than I thought I was eating them. I'd come in the morning and things wouldn't be where I'd left them. At one point, I brought a bag of chips to work, folded the rim of the bag down so I wasn't plunging my elbow deep into a grease pit, and then put a bag clip on it when I went home, and when I came in the next morning, the bag was unrolled and reclipped. I went, wow, I must be more tired than I thought. Rolled the bag back down, and the next morning it was unrolled again. Just little things like that, almost every day, that made me go, wow, the post-baby brain is worse than I thought. And then I got the flu. I got the flu and I was out for a whole week. Left behind at the office was an almost full box of Enjoy Life cookies, which are not enjoyable but are free of all major allergens, and are also $5 a box for like 12 sad little sand pies with cinnamon on top. I ate one row of these cookies and then I was out of the office for a week. For 1 week, I was not eating any of my snack hoard, but someone else was. Because I came back to work, opened my box of cookies, and found one. There was one single solitary cookie left. And on further examination, the one box of candy that had been opened was nowhere to be found. And on top of that, the thief had done me the courtesy of opening a new box for me. Except that they actually followed the push here to open instructions instead of just ripping one end of the box open like I do. Which they should damn well know at this point, because by this time, they'd been stealing from me for 2 goddamn months. The combination of these two things, the sheer freaking audacity it takes to open a new box so you can continue stealing from someone on top of the consumption of almost a whole box of specialty cookies that aren't even good, enraged me enough that after going to my boss and getting some vague promises about checking if the security cameras in my wing of the building are functional or not, what? I went straight to Amazon and ordered myself a nanny cam. Not for my baby, for my snack hoard. Conveniently, it arrived the day before Valentine's Day. I set it up on the top of the file cabinet looking down at my desk. On the desk, I laid out a fantastic spread of bait snacks. I got all my thieves' favorites, and then I took it one step further. I bought myself a Valentine heart, broke the seal to make it more inviting, and left it out on my desk. The next morning, I came into some very obvious snack carnage. My thief had slowly been getting more brazen. Again, who opens a new box of something and opens it differently than the person they are stealing from? But this was just on another level. Individually wrapped things had been dumped out of their boxes, bits of packaging had been thrown away, and yup, they'd eaten some of the Valentine candy. For shame, office thief. Don't you know that's from someone who loves me? I played back the video. All was quiet throughout most of the evening, and I was just watching the shadows lengthen as the sun slowly set through the hallway window. And then, shortly before midnight, the night janitor arrived and went right ahead and took a 12-minute break in my office, sitting in my chair, eating my food. I started taking screenshots, getting him shoveling candy into his mouth with palm-to-lips intensity, pouring things out onto the desk to pick his favorite flavors, not even bothering to put them back where he found them. And yes, eating my goddamn Valentine's candy. Screenshots went directly to my boss in an email. I went directly to my boss's door to hover and grin and ask if he'd read my email, and I got assurances of a strongly worded email to the cleaning company and the barring of this particular employee from our place of business. I was also, tactfully, asked to please take my unauthorized spy camera home, which I did. I thought this was over, until the girl who works the concession stand dropped by to thank me. Apparently, the food thief would start a shift just as she was closing down for the night, and would try to get free coffee in that creepy guy way. And then one of the reception staff came by with the same sentiments. I'd never met the guy face to face, but apparently, as a woman, it was not a fun experience to have. I had shown my screenshots to a few coworkers whose eating OP's food had become office gossip by this point, and word had spread fast. I worked an earlier shift, so I didn't recognize him, but people whose shifts overlapped with his did. I hadn't told my husband what I'd done because when I came home raging about the blatant theft that had gone on while I'd had the flu, his only response had been, "You really shouldn't be leaving food at work then." But when I came home with the nanny cam and explained where I'd gotten it, his reaction surprised me. "You know, I think this is the first time I've seen you stand up for yourself. I'm proud of you." You know what, Reddit? I'm proud of me too. Oh, that was a sweet little ending. And that must have been really satisfying to finally catch your thief in the act, because that would be terrifyingly frustrating to have to do. I hate being frustrated. I mean, obviously, it's a negative feeling, but goodness gracious, when I get frustrated, what do you do? What do you do? You just freaking go Donkey Kong on everything and start breaking crap. That's all you can do. And I'm glad food thievery got some revenge that didn't get the revenge doer in trouble, because usually when you spike your food with laxatives, people tend to make a big deal out of it because it's poisoning, but they're stealing. They wouldn't freaking get poisoned if they didn't steal from you. Like, how do you know I don't have constipation and I need laxatives? Who are you to tell me I can't? This story's called Mess With My Kids? That's gonna cost you a pretty penny and get you in trouble with the law. So I've got an acquaintance, Richard, who has always been of the I know better than you school of thought. What makes it worse is that he literally received his PhD in physics from one of my country's top universities about 6 months ago, so he's not a dummy. The problem is that he thinks that because he's a physics genius, that means he knows better than everyone about everything. Just an example. My kids are in Montessori school. This is a decision my wife and I reached together, and we're very happy with it. When he heard, he went on a 30-minute rant or lecture about how we're throwing away our money and Montessori is nonsense. When I told him that I had read and even professionally translated studies proving the opposite, and gave him some real-world examples, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, he still would not admit he might not be 100% correct. Not the subject of this revenge, but so you understand the person we're dealing with. Another thing that's important to note is that Richard does not have Asperger's or anything similar. We joke about this all the time, and he's been tested from here until next week. He's just a really smart, socially oblivious pain in the ass. Given all of the above, I try to limit my time with him, but unfortunately, that isn't always possible. And last week, we were both at the same group braai for a friend, Jack, who was visiting back home from overseas. So we brought our families and made it more than just a long time no see type of thing. At some point later on in the afternoon, my eldest, awesome, less than 10-year-old, came to see me really sad and said she wanted to go home. When I asked her why, she said that Richard had just spent 15 minutes telling her that she shouldn't eat hot dogs because they're unhealthy. And he explained what went into hot dogs and what they're made out of. Awesome is not a vegetarian, knows that the beef and chicken she eats used to be live animals, and has never professed interest in vegetarianism. At the same time, when a kid is eating a hot dog, they don't care or want to know what's inside. We spoke a bit, I calmed her down, and I told her to ignore Richard and go play with her siblings and her friends. Being a kid, she was always, thankfully, easily distracted by something else and moved on. I didn't want to make a fuss with Jack or with Richard, so I just let it be. This turned out to be a mistake. About 30 minutes later, I heard Awesome scream and begin crying. I ran over to her. Richard had come up to her and knocked her hot dog out of her hand, saying she shouldn't eat that garbage. I handed Awesome over to my wife for damage control, and I took Richard aside and told him that A, you don't ever talk to a man's kids without permission, B, you don't ever teach a man's kids without permission, and C, you sure as crap don't ever touch a man's kids without permission. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. This turned out to be a mistake. Instead of doing the mature thing and moving on, he decided to double down on the hot dog issue. This was the hill he was going to die on. My kids shouldn't be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged and told him to stay the hell away from my family. For the rest of the RV, I kept my eye on him and he didn't come near them. Jack enjoyed himself, we all ate some good meat. End of the story as far as I'm concerned. This turned out to be a mistake. A few days later, we received a visit from a CPS officer who claimed that we were neglecting our kids, specifically Awesome. She came in and saw that while the house could have been cleaner, what house with kids is spotless? Everything was fine. She sat with Awesome for a few minutes and asked her some questions, said everything was fine, and left. First thing I did was call a friend of mine who is a lawyer, just to be on the safe side. He said it looked to him like we were in the clear, but we should keep in touch with him just in case. Next, I began working the grapevine. It turned out that Richard had been offended by how I treated him after the hot dog incident, so he filed a false anonymous report. Being Richard and never thinking he could ever be wrong, he was even talking about it as if people should be proud of him for what he did. I had to make sure though, so the last thing I did before dropping the hammer on him was confronting him personally. I set my phone to record and went to his house. He doubled down yet again, saying we were torturing Awesome. He's the one who called CPS on us, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. This turned out to be a mistake. I'm not the violent type, but I swear I wanted to break the son of a in half. I told him that if he came near myself or anyone in my family again, I'd have a restraining order put out on him, and I'd make sure every single one of our shared acquaintances knew why. I listened to the recording in my car, and his admission that he filed a false report came out clear as day. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who said he'll get the ball rolling with some friends of his with the public prosecutor to see if we could get Richard in trouble, using his admission. Still waiting on that, the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. Then I enacted my actual revenge. See, after he got his PhD, Richard bragged about the new flat he'd be moving into as soon as he sold his current flat. To that end, he renovated most of his current flat, including putting in lots of new and expensive features that required lots of electrical work. He did the same on his new flat. He did most of the electrical work himself, which is a big no-no unless you're licensed. I called in an inspector on both of his flats. who asked to see certification on who did the electrical work. Obviously, there was no certification. It wouldn't surprise me if Richard, being Richard, he began arguing with the inspector that his work was good enough and he didn't need to pay someone else to do it for him. I haven't seen or spoken to Richard since, but I've heard that he had to bring in a certified electrician to examine every single change he made in both flats. This meant dismantling everything and having it inspected. Turns out, the buyers of his old flat weren't happy with the delay in receiving the keys, and were even unhappier when they learned why there was a delay. They walked away from the deal and are taking him to court. Because his sale fell through, he's now in the hole paying mortgages on 2 flats. I don't know if there was a fine levied against him, but I sure as hell hope so. The lesson of the story: you don't ever mess with a man's kids. Not quite a huge ProRevenge story, but it was still a good one, well written. And we all know a freaking Richard in our lives, someone who knows everything and refuses to accept when they're wrong. Now, I can be a bit of a know-it-all, but I pride myself in always admitting when I know I'm wrong. That doesn't always mean that I always know when I'm wrong, but as soon as I, figure out that I was wrong about something, I'm like, oh, shoot, you're right, I'm wrong. And you know what? It might be difficult to do at first, but once you admit that you're wrong and be like, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry, it feels good. Because you don't have that feeling of being a stubborn ass and the conversation's over and you look more mature for doing it and you look more open-minded for doing it. And people that are open-minded, they tend to be more intelligent than those who aren't because they're receptive to new information. Trust me, if you have trouble admitting when you're wrong, just try it out. It really feels better in the end. And you don't end up, like Richard here. This story's called Today I Fudged Up by Telling My Grown-Ass College Students What Contraceptives Are at a Conservative Christian University. I'm a grad student teaching freshman English courses at a conservative Christian university. At the end of the semester, my students have to present a slideshow proposing a change they think would make the world better. One of my students, Steven, asked if he could make his slideshow about safe sex education being made mandatory in all public high schools. Me, not even sure if I was allowed to approve a topic in favor of rampant and unchecked fornication among the youths of America, eventually told him to go for it, warning him that he'd have to be very careful about what he put into his slideshow, considering his topic. The day of Steven's presentation arrives. He marches to the front and begins his slideshow entitled The Case for Contraceptives. It's freaking great. He tells a story about bees who, if they want to get some sweet nectar from flowers without spreading any of their pollen around, need to learn to wear little booties on their feet. I laughed through the whole thing and then turned to the class to discuss the presentation's effectiveness, but several students had blank expressions. Finally, one of the students, Goober, this student and his nickname is Pure Gold, but that's another story, raised his hand and said, "Ms. Holt? What's contraceptive?" I started to smile, but stopped as I realized he was serious. I paused and remembered my life before college, shuttled in a bubble between homeschooling and church and youth group. We had a brief discussion about contraceptives then and there. The next day, my classroom behavior was put under review by my boss and my boss's boss. And I was warned I was under unofficial probation. Everyone at this university signs up as an at-will employee, meaning we can be fired at any time for any reason. Edit: many people are asking why I choose to work at such an institution. I'll ask myself the same question until I graduate and leave. But in the meantime, I love my students, and I'll keep trying to crack open their brains like my homeschooled Christian brain was cracked open when I first went to college. Also, several people have messaged me asking if I go to their school, and they've named so many different schools. As Childish Gambino once said, this is America. First off, I gotta say that was pretty ballsy of that kid to do a presentation on contraceptives because, as many of you guys know, conservative Christian university plus anything sex positive equals big no-no. And that's okay. They're a private Christian school. They can have their values. However, I don't think that they should prioritize those values over the health of students because you know what? A majority of them really don't care. For instance, BYU. Have a friend that goes to BYU and, in case you don't know, that's a Mormon school, and usually Mormons, they usually practice their faith religiously. That's funny. Anyways, and they got a lot of people there that don't necessarily care about abstinence, which is all that Christian schools teach students, which, again, like I said, that's not going to help anyone. Basically, you gotta hope your kids don't do that stuff, but if they do, wouldn't you want them to be safe, right? Because they will. And if they don't, then they wouldn't have before the whole safe sex conversation occurred.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode.